Hello, my loves. Continue to update new stories on Reddit, and don't forget if you like it, please subscribe and like it. Now let's start new stories. Story, a kind of sad love story. In May of 2017, I met a girl in-game. To protect her identity, we will call her Diana, maybe between the 20th to 25th of May. In the match, I noticed that everyone was saying she was a girl because of a mistake a player made, thinking she was a guy, lol. As the match ended, I went to private message to talk to Diana, just to establish a conversation after what happened. She ended up being a nice girl, to be honest. After 1 hour of talking, we shared various experiences in the game and some opinions about it. It was time to go to bed for both of us, so we said goodbye to each other and disconnected. As some weeks went by, we had already established a kind of friendship between us, a weird one. A lot of things happened during June, my 9th grade graduation, some friendship problems with a friend, depression from leaving high school, my birthday. Really, a lot of problems were in my head at that time. But I really didn't give AF *** about all of that. Until the worst arrived. Diana told me she wanted to tell me something very important and invited me to a private room. After about 30 seconds of uncomfortable silence, she said, "I am worried about something." "About what?" I asked. "I'm getting hospitalized soon." The awkward silence returned, but only for 5 seconds. "When?" "Why?" "Tomorrow, maybe at night. I have heart problems, they are getting worse." "Are you going to be okay?" "I don't know." After she was about to leave, I didn't have much to say, but I dumbly said what I felt for her. "I already know what you are thinking." And just after that, I barely remember her message saying, "I love you too." Weird, isn't it? I'll continue the other part because I need some rest for now. I haven't slept in a while. Teletubby back where I was. After a month and a half knowing us, we started to talk a lot more often. I always told her compliments, to somehow distract her of her problems. Sometimes I skipped classes just to talk to her somewhere else in school. Maybe I was being manipulated by love, or the interesting fact that Diana was the first girlfriend I had in my 15 years of existence. On the 6th of August, I received a message from Diana, saying that she was going to get operated on. I told her, "Everything will be okay, you are in good hands, nothing is going to hurt you." She thanked me, saying, "I am relaxed now, thanks 3. I replied with a simple, "You're welcome," and she responded with her always common but lovely, "I love you." Hey, my doctor says it's time. Now that I'm relaxed, I'm not worried anymore. CYA:// that was the last thing I heard from her that day. I couldn't sleep that night. I was very, very worried, instead of thinking she was fine. The next day after school, I went directly to my house, because fuck projects, went straight to log into the game. She was online. Yes, she is fine. "Hi Diana, how was it? What happened?" "Hi, I'm fine, you were right. Although I have pain in my chest, but nothing else. I was really worried about you, I didn't sleep last night. I promise I'm fine, don't worry." We started talking for a while about each other. Story, my boyfriend left me on the side of the road at 2 in the morning 4 hours from my house. This story is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. I, 21 years old, was dating my now ex-boyfriend, 23 years old, for the last year. Let's call him James. James and I met at college and he graduated last year. I'm still in school. He recently moved up to the city I live near, which was exciting because he lived about 3.5 hours away previously. He moved for a new job he got after being fired from his previous one, red flag, I know. We had plans to go to a concert in a city about 4 to 5 hours away. We decided to make a day of it and intended to sleep at his family's house, which was a 45 to 60-minute train ride from the venue and was where he had just moved from, so it was familiar. We parked at the train station instead of his family's house, assuming we'd be sober by the time we got back from the concert. I am not from this area and he is, so he took the lead on trains and transportation to and from the venue. He got us into the city only to realize he put us on the wrong train and we'd have to take multiple subway rides to get to where we wanted to go. I have chronic migraines and am prone to passing out, which he knows, so I had originally offered to figure out all the train situations to avoid subways because I knew I couldn't handle the environment. He assured me he had it. He did not. I passed out in the subway on a long, broken escalator he made me walk down instead of finding another, and a stranger caught me because he had walked too far ahead to notice what happened. He didn't even realize I had passed out, he thought I was just a bit overwhelmed. Finally, we got to the venue, almost 2 hours later than intended. I eventually took over train directions and got us there as he couldn't seem to get a handle on it. The concert was fun, except he got upset when I talked to anyone that wasn't him. The artist we saw is known for fostering a nice environment where people make friends and everyone gets along well. He didn't like the scene and he refers to not liking a scene whenever it's a queer space. This night was when I finally pieced that correlation together. As someone who's bisexual, it's definitely a problem and seeing him act that way so blatantly was really upsetting. It's okay if he doesn't want to befriend people, but he specifically didn't want to befriend people because they were queer. After the concert, I asked him if he'd figured out the trains for the way home as my phone was dead and I couldn't figure it out. He had not. We proceeded to walk the streets of this major city for 2 hours. He put us on 4 wrong trains and kept getting us farther and farther from where we needed to go. The entire time we were on the trains, he was texting his misogynistic brother about how I didn't spend enough time with him, what a bitch I am, and how I'm holding him back. I broke down at one point and was pretty upset with him because it was 1 a.m. at this point, the concert let out at 11, and we were nowhere near his house. I begged him to call an Uber, said I would pay for it, and when he wouldn't, I just sat down on the sidewalk and said I couldn't do the trains anymore. He finally got an Uber at the promise of me Venmoing him when my phone turned on. We got back to his family's house around 2 a.m. I had fallen asleep in the Uber ride back to his house for about 15 minutes and was much more sobered up by the time we got there as I wasn't very intoxicated to begin with. I have medication I absolutely have to take or I will be incapacitated the next day. It was left in my bag in his car that was at the train station because he had presumed we'd be taking the train back. I should have brought some with me, but it never crossed my mind that we wouldn't make it back to his car. I told him I'd just Uber there and go get it if I could use his keys to get in. He said no, took his dad's keys, and drove his car to the parking lot. Looking back, he was nowhere near sober and should not have been driving. When we pulled into the parking lot, he looked at me and decided this was the moment to tell me he didn't want to be together. He started crying and getting self-deprecating, telling me he's a terrible person and a liar. This isn't the first time he's done this. He usually acts like this when I'm upset with him to get out of the argument with no resolution. I originally tried to comfort him, and then he started yelling. I attempted to de-escalate the situation and told him it was fine if he didn't want to be together, but could we please talk at his house? He said I was no longer welcome at his house because he didn't want to deal with the discomfort, presumably of having me over after shit-talking me to his brothers. We went back and forth for a bit, and eventually, I just asked him what I was supposed to do. I just asked one final time, "Is this how you want this to end?" He said yes. He said he doesn't love me and he doesn't want me in his house with his dad and brothers. I just nodded, got my stuff out of his car, and left. It was pouring rain and my phone was dead. It was 2:30 in the morning and I was in the only sketchy part of his hometown. I went into the parking garage across the street because it was pouring rain. There were loud Dodge Chargers circling past me repeatedly. Multiple men came up to me in their cars and offered for me to get in their cars, and one man got out and attempted to coax me into his car, only backing away when I lied and said I was on the phone with the police. I eventually got my phone to turn on to 3% out of some luck and called my mom. She woke up the only family member nearby, who is elderly and lives 30 minutes away, and got me an Uber to their house. She called James, who had turned his phone off, and his father, who did not reply. My phone died in the Uber. Fortunately, the driver was kind and got me to the family member's house safely. The next morning, nothing from him to myself or my mom. His dad had texted me asking if I was okay. That was it. Our relationship had been rocky, but there was literally no circumstance that would validate this situation. I told my friends and our mutual friends the whole story, and they all immediately removed him from everything and cut him off. Being away from him, despite the circumstances, has been really awesome for me though. I get to put time into myself, and I didn't realize how much I did for him. I found his apartment, car, and job for him because he said he didn't know how to. I introduced him to my friends and family and welcomed him into my world. He really just wanted me to be at his beck and call and there 100% for him. As soon as I told him I was doing things to take care of myself, he snapped because earlier the day of the concert, I told him about the gym I joined and the diet I was on to better my physical and mental health. I think that's it. Scary situation, but it went the best way it could've. He told one of our mutual friends he hoped one day we could get back together after he worked on himself. I'll pass on those delusions, though. Story: how a 4-year relationship ended in a night. My 28-year-old fiancé, 28-year-old, of 4.5 years recently called of our engagement after an argument about her college diploma. For context, we have been dating 4.5 years, and of that time we have been engaged 6 months. I proposed last January. From the day we met, she has been in school and originally was living with her family while she did just that. No job, no other responsibilities. Just school. That being said, as we progressed over time and she slowly began to spend less time at her family's house and more time with me, I became more responsible for our living expenses as she had no income other than financial aid a few times a year. Since I am active duty military, my housing is covered for the most part depending on location and rank, and I lived in a 1-bed 1-bath that was easy to incorporate her into when she'd come and visit for the weekend or so. About a year later, I bought my first house and had roommates, which made finances much easier. Additionally, she eventually got a part-time job which helped her cover her own expenses better and even offer some help with bills. However, for the most part one was still majorly responsible for our expenses as these part-time jobs never seemed to last, but I was okay with it because I loved her and believed I was helping her achieve her goal of a degree. Several years later, a few months ago we were having a discussion about moving on to base housing. I sold my house prior to moving for my next tour and have since been living in apartments again. For anyone who is unfamiliar with military terms, base housing is just as it sounds, a house in a neighborhood built within the perimeter of the base. Since our time together we got a dog, and often wished he could have a yard again for him. Additionally, we had some real close friends who also lived on base, and it would make our very frequent weekend BBQs much more enjoyable if we were able to just walk home rather than drive 30 minutes, not to mention more space, a guest room for friends and family to visit, just overall a better situation. There was a catch, however. In order to be eligible for base housing, we would need to be legally married. Something that is fairly common in military relationships, a courthouse-style wedding, although not always for the best reasons. Since we had already been engaged half a year, and I was due to deploy later on this year, holding off any real wedding planning, alongside her graduation coming in the fall, we had discussed the benefits of having a quick courthouse elopement prior to my deployment so I could share my service benefits with her, healthcare, family services, etc., and a huge plus was the pay raise, about $1,000 extra a month, that we had talked about saving and using for our actual wedding whenever we decided what we wanted to do. This wasn't the only time I had brought up progressing this way, as the benefits IMO greatly outweighed any risks. We had plenty of dialogue in the past as well that led me to believe she felt the same way, and in fact wanted to be official just as much as I did, aside from all the things discussed above. I brought it up casually as I usually would. A coworker had just told me about some openings in some of the nicer houses on base. I told her about them and she was very interested. I then went on to remind her that in order for us to apply, we would first need to be legally married. For the most part, one was the only one who ever brought this up, and it never really bothered me because up to this point I had no reason to believe she wanted anything different. Instead of seeming excited and willing to move forward, she began to complain about things like our marriage certificate being from a state she doesn't like, saying she'd now rather wait until we could go somewhere exotic and out of the country. This isn't something I was completely against, but it would defeat the purpose of all the reasons and benefits we had been discussing previously. I tried to reason with her, but I'll have to admit I was hurt. I was 100% willing to make this official and marry my best friend, benefits aside. I had partially hoped she'd match my energy there. Frustrated and confused, I began to seek answers. I wanted to know why I was openly 100% committed, and it felt like I wasn't getting the same in return. I began to ask for reasons or explanations on why I was feeling this way, and if there was something I was missing that may be holding her back. I remember specifically asking about school, because it was made clear in the very beginning of our relationship that school was above all the most important thing to her. To be clear, I also supported this. So much to the point where if she needed books and couldn't afford them, I ordered them for her. Her school was 100% online, so I was paying monthly for absolute screaming internet for her. I would work full days and come home and prepare dinner, grocery shop, clean, etc. You guys get it. I was her #1 fan, and supported her and loved her though all the failed exams, birthdays and events missed because she's in a group meeting, and constantly promoted positivity and clarity regarding any uncertainty about her degree plan and future. I was there and did everything I could. I am confident in that even as I type this now. When we got to this topic, I'll cut right to it. I asked her if she was hesitant because of anything to do with school or her upcoming graduation. This is where she told me that she hadn't really thought much of it, but now that she does, she doesn't want to get married prior to her graduation because she doesn't want my last name to be the one on her diploma. She told me that if it was that way, she felt as if it would take away from her and her accomplishments alone. She has been doubted before by other family, and if it didn't say her name it wouldn't feel as good to prove those doubters wrong. Something like that. This hit home, probably harder due to what felt like, rejection earlier on the legal marriage. All I was trying to do was ensure 1. She was taken care of while I'm away from home and can't help, and 2. Progress our relationship to what seemed like our next organic step and what had been mutually desired and agreed upon. This causes a huge argument, as she begins to label me as controlling for not seeing why it had to be her way, and we spent the entire night making attempts to show where we had been hurt by the other. Eventually we had made up, found common ground, enough to shower together and spend some close time in bed. Sadly, it wasn't enough. The next day she came home in tears, informed me that everything from last night wasn't sitting well with her, and that she was moving back home and calling off our engagement. I was handed back the ring and began to try to ask questions. What changed? I thought last night we were okay, etc. She told me she had nothing else to say to me, but through the tears and packing managed to look me in the eyes and say these last words: even if I realize I'm making the biggest mistake of my life, it is something I am going to live with because there's no coming back. She left me and our dog that night after taking everything she cared enough about and packing it into her car. It's been a few months since this all went down. All of this time has been no contact. I think it also needs to be said that I never expected her to have my last name on her diploma. It was something I never even thought about until the heat of the argument. I think what really got me, what really cut deep, was hearing her say her and her accomplishments alone, while looking me dead in my face like I haven't done shit to help her get there. Again, all Eve ever known her as was a student. I accepted the financial burden that was trying to build a life with someone in that stage of life. It was never about me expecting that, but I guess also I had believed that if the roles were reversed, if I were that student being taken care of single-handedly by this person I loved more than anything, said yes to marrying, knowing the sacrifices and difficulty of taking care of someone who can hardly maintain a part-time job, maybe I wouldn't try to act like I did this on my own. I was very yes-oriented. I made almost every important decision thinking of how it could help us or benefit us. I think I set myself up for failure assuming I would have that same level of commitment in return. I also know I took it much harder given circumstances, but never would have guessed it would tear apart a 4-year relationship for wanting to feel appreciated and recognized for IMO going above and beyond anyone else in her life to help her achieve her goal. Story: A First Love to Remem. I, currently 20F, had this friend, we'll call him Zero for this story, that I had known since my freshman year of high school. We were really close. To put it simply, we both love anime and Vocaloid. We would watch songs together during lunch period and sit next to each other in Japanese class. He was 2 grades higher than me, but I didn't care. He had always been there for me for freshman and part of sophomore year, because school got cancelled due to the you-know-what in 2020. He would give me and my family presents on special occasions, and we'd do all kinds of things outside of school, going to each other's houses, going to the movies, going to anime conventions, you name it. He was very supportive as well, and was always there for me whenever I needed somebody to talk to. And I was there for him as well. He was like a brother to me, although I have a brother myself. He also got along very well with the rest of my family. It was like he was an additional family member to them. However, I should have known these times were too good to last. Fast forward to October 2022, my mom tells me that Zero texted her. He has her number because previously, she gave it to him when we went to cons in case of emergency, saying that he has a crush on me. She wanted to know how I felt about it. I told her that I didn't see Zero the same way, and that he's just a good friend to me. My mom assured me that even if I see Zero romantically, she's all for it, but reminded me that I shouldn't get serious about dating until I finish college, because according to her, education comes first. Other than that, she was pretty much fine with the whole idea. I will get into detail about their conversation later. Now, Zero has been through a lot of different girlfriends. Even a boyfriend. He's been open to me about the different people he's dated, and why he broke up with them. He also has a very confusing life, bouncing from job to job, trying to find a place to live, many things that I can't keep up with. He also told me he has bipolar disorder and has had ugly meltdowns in the past, and how badly he's been bullied in his childhood. He told me that I was his very first friend he met in my high school, the school he transferred to where he met me, and that I saved his life in a way. But I think after my mom informed me that Zero had a crush on me, Zero admitted it to me, but he said he gave up on the crush because he just saw me as a friend, the same way I did. I thought it made sense, because he was seeing a girl at the time. Or maybe he wasn't, I can't remember, honestly. After that conversation, Zero messaged me somewhere in June 2023 that he thinks my mom is pushing me and Zero to be a couple. I was taken aback by this kind of statement. There's no way my mom would do such a thing. I said these things to him, and he said to me that he would rather not have me talk about it with my parents. He didn't really explain why, maybe it was awkward for him. But I still said I would talk about it with them. He said he wouldn't recommend it. Still, I needed to know if it was true or not. A few days later, I spoke to my mom about it. She said, "What? No way. I never said anything like that. He's lying. He's being a troublemaker. I would never force a boy on you." Going back to the conversation my mom had with Zero, I saw the messages. My mom lets me use her phone sometimes and doesn't mind when I look at her messages. Zero was talking about how he's had a crush on me ever since high school, and nowhere in the messages did my mom indicate that she wanted us to be a couple. It was mostly just, "I don't mind if you date her. But if it does happen, I'm going to establish some ground rules. You can't be out after 9 p.m, you have to tell us where you're going. And all that stuff." She was pretty chill with it and didn't shame him, force him, or anything. It was just being open to it, but also being a mom and making sure that the two of us were in a good position to date before we ever got into it. That was the only time they had ever texted each other, as there were no more messages beyond October 2022. So I texted Zero and told him, hey. I told my mom about it, and she said she never said anything like that. I'm not trying to call you a liar, but is there some sort of proof that indicates that she ever forced us to be a couple? He then texted me back, quote, so, let me get this straight. You ignored my feelings, and now you expect me to help you? Some friend you are. I was taken aback by this, as I had no idea he was going to get this angry over it. I was expecting him to be compliant over it, not this. He then says, I'm no tool, so I don't appreciate being used. Normally, when people do this kind of thing, I turn them into social experiments. However, out of respect for all the years we've had together, I won't. But never contact me again. Goodbye. I then got so panicked. I frantically texted him to please listen to me, to which he replied, you have 5 minutes. I then apologized for telling my mom about this, as I just wanted to know if it was true about the forcing thing. That I'm sorry for hurting his feelings and all that stuff. He then said, okay, but here's the thing. Because of what you did, you put me in a tough position with your parents, so therefore, I'm not coming over anymore. We can only be friends virtually. I didn't think much of it, as I thought he would soon get over it. He pretty much just accepted me back as a friend. We talked normally again, as if nothing ever happened. Until I decided to tell him, I still can't believe I made that mistake. He told him, you're still my friend and I forgive you. I'm over it. You just have to forgive yourself. I told him I'm tired of the tension between my family and him. He told me, there's no tension. I just won't come over anymore. My pride won't let me. I didn't understand it. What does he mean by pride? I let it be. Days later, I asked him, what would it take for you to come back? He then said, to be honest, I don't think anything will. It's hard to explain, but my pride won't let me see you. I told him that my parents aren't really mad at him, it was all just one big misunderstanding, but still, he said, all I can say is, I just can't go over there. It feels wrong. I figured maybe he's just embarrassed, so I let it be again. I had tried unsuccessfully multiple times to convince him that nothing is wrong, he's welcome to come see me and my family again, but still, he kept saying he wouldn't see us again. Aside from that, we still had normal conversations. I thought maybe he needed to hear it from my parents that everything was fine, not from me. So I asked my dad to call/text him. My dad did that, but there was no answer. He then texted him, hey Zero, how are you? I just want to see how you're doing, as it's been a while. No response. Days passed, and my dad told me Zero still hasn't replied. My dad then said, oh well. If he doesn't want to talk to us, that's fine. That was the part when I decided to tell Zero everything about how I felt. I told him I was tired of his excuses to not see us again, that I just wanted our friendship to be back the way it was, and that it's like he just doesn't understand that nothing is wrong between us. I also mentioned that I didn't understand how he got so upset over the fact that I told my mom about the forcing thing. That I couldn't deal with it anymore. I just wanted things to be back to normal. His responses didn't really make it much better, but he cleared up some confusions. Or so I thought. First off, he mentioned that he said his pride wouldn't let him see me because it's an abstract concept that you wouldn't understand, and that if anybody asks about why we don't see each other, that I should say it's because of our family's cultural differences and such, and it still made no sense to me. He also said that it wasn't like he never wanted to see me. He just didn't want to see my parents. He would still ask me how they were doing in the past, he just didn't want to see them in person or speak to them. He never said that he didn't want to see my parents, it was always you. He said he'd be open to hanging out if there was a situation where he didn't have to see my parents. He stated he was embarrassed about the entire situation. Normal embarrassment he can get over, but this, he just couldn't. He ended it by saying that this is just something that's not under any of our control, and that I should accept it. He said maybe, just maybe, he would get the guts to see my parents again, but it's a slim possibility. So we continued things from here. However, us meeting in person never happened due to things that happened in both our lives. He got a new girlfriend with whom he helped move in with him, and became busier than ever. We rarely talked through these times. He said he didn't go through with his plans to hang out because of his new job and all the other stuff. So I let it go. For the rest of the months leading up to my breaking point, we talked on and off. I even got to chat with his girlfriend at some points, and she was friendly. But I never told her about the incident between me and Zero because I didn't want to start any drama. I then started to realize that this kind of friendship wasn't sustainable for me anymore. As much as I loved talking to Zero, I couldn't be friends with someone who wanted to leave a scar on such a beautiful relationship he had with my parents, and to just throw it all away because of one incident that may make sense in his mind, but no sense in mine. I thought maybe there's no point in continuing with this friendship. It was just making me sad, being constantly reminded that this person is no longer coming to my house frequently, to make jokes with my family and play with my pet cats. It felt wrong just to be a virtual friend to him. I was tired of making myself feel miserable about this part of our friendship that was missing. So in June of this year, I sent him a message saying that I couldn't do this anymore. I think it's best we go our separate ways, and it's obvious that we have our differences. He pretty much accepted the fact that I didn't want to continue with the friendship anymore, and we ended things with peace. I always wonder to myself if I was at fault for making our friendship end the way it did. Part of me feels like I never should have told my mom about what Zero told me, where he thought my mom was pushing us to be a couple. Maybe then our friendship would have remained how it used to be. I even told my parents that I decided to end things with Zero, and while they accepted my decision, they reminded me that I have the right to cut someone out if I feel like they're not the right friend for me. In this case, Zero's unwillingness to make up to my family, to let the past go, for whatever reason in his mind was just not doing it for me, albeit we did everything we could to assure him everything was fine. I've talked to some of my other friends about this story, and each and every one of them have said that it's the stupidest thing that Zero did. That no friend would do such a thing over something so trivial. They even suggested that Zero lied about my mom saying that to him just so he could date me, and now he can't look at me because he got caught in his stupid lie. They also told me it's best I let him go, but at the time, I didn't want to, as I just wanted to give Zero the benefit of the doubt. But as time passed by, I thought, what's the point of trying to water a dead plant? Maybe I should have let Zero end things right then and there last year. Short story about the first boy I fell in love with. The stupor of the summer heat brought me a sense of comfort as I stared off into the sunset sitting on top of my friend's roof. The distant sounds of cars rolling by softly drummed in my ears. I could hear my other friends laughing. The joy in their voices was almost palpable to the touch. As a smile crept on my face, in that moment, I yearned for nothing than for that moment to never end. A cool breeze swept over my face as if it were a signal from the sun itself that it was now receding over the horizon, an au revoir to a beautiful day. Oranges and purples turned into cool blues and deep violets as the silver-tinged moon rose over the now dark skyline. I had seen him earlier that day. His handsome face, tall frame, and messy brown hair bounced as he ran past the house I was staying at. "I'll see you later," he said as he ran by. I wish I could relive the almost celestial feeling that those words gave me. Drops of dopamine. Surges of serotonin. Those words were electrifying. As I reminisced over those emotions on the roof, we began filing one by one out of the window and towards the local pizza restaurant. We walked through the humid summer night air, laughing and joking with each other. During that whole time, I could only think of him. Was it the aura of his confidence that seemed to bring me under his enchanting gaze? Or was it his gleaming white smile that could pierce even those darkest of cloudy days? Whatever the reason, my heart raced with excitement at the thought of seeing him later that night. We grabbed the largest pizza the place had to offer. The pizza was almost too big and burdensome to carry back to the house, but we took turns, shoving the piping hot box into each other's arms like it was a game of hot potato. Once we got back, we immediately went over to the back porch where the soft yellow glow of the lights illuminated the cozy backdrop of our new hangout spot. Time blurred away as we got lost in conversation. The sounds of crickets. The soulful sounds of a genuine deep laugh. I could see the memories in front of me already being burned into my mind. The joy I felt being among them was inexplicable. But as I checked the time on my phone, I realized it was finally time for the meeting I had been longing for since I had arrived in town. It was time for him. I took one final sip from my can, gave my friends the most exuberant hug I could give, and stepped down from the balcony. The moon cast its ghostly pale blue rays down on the sidewalk as I turned the corner to his place. It almost felt like it was trying to reassure me as my heart drummed in my chest. Before I could have time to consider the doubt that was slowly creeping into my mind, he opened the door. There he was, just as stunning as before. His blue eyes were still luminescent and bright in the darkness of the night. He offered me his hand, and like instinct, I reached out to grab it. As we sat there in his bed, we talked on and on for hours about whatever nonsense we had decided to land on. I tried my best to do anything to make him laugh. That beaming smile that could melt even the iciest of hearts. This boy had enchanted me, a feeling that I had never felt in my life before. The scariest thing was that I was completely fine with him conquering my every desire and fear. Never had someone so easily comforted me and brought me into a place of absolute trust. As the night rushed by, we lay down side by side. His face nuzzled my neck as he threw his arms over my chest. I knew he could feel the rapid thumps coming from my chest. The heat radiated from my face as he kissed me gently on my neck and ears. I turned over to him, looking into his eyes. It was like an ocean, one where you could look out from the shoreline and get lost in the waves that twinkled in the hot summer sun. I was completely engulfed with desire, a longing for someone so strong that for a moment, I knew nothing more than what it was like to be with him. He brought me in closer, sliding me so that my chest met his, our legs wrapped together. I knew he could see the burning flames of passion in his eyes when he kissed me. The sounds of 1,000 fireworks burst in my heart as he held me close and kissed every part of my body. A euphoria that no drug could ever even dream of buying. He grabbed the towel and laughed as he gently wiped away at my face. There it was again, that ever-brilliant smile. He jumped back into bed and lay directly beside me. The conversation continued just as quickly as it had before. Hours turned into seconds when I was with him. In the one moment when the room fell silent, I laid my head back against his chest and stared at the window as the moon's comforting light fell directly to our feet. "I never want this night to end," I blurted. "Me either, this is everything I could have ever wished for," he replied. I embraced him, millions of neurons firing in my brain telling me to never let him go. As we fell asleep together, the moon outside the window bid me one last goodnight as its brilliant platinum beams began to fade to the dawn of a new day. Golden filtered rays splashed through the windows when I woke up that morning. The air conditioner hummed silently in the background as I peeled freshly washed covers off the air mattress I had slept on the night before. I stood up, smirking as I looked back at the air mattress. At least it was only temporary, I thought as I stretched and glanced around the newly minted room that I would call home for the next year. Flurries of little butterflies danced in my stomach and chest when I thought about his arrival that day. I stepped out into the living room, the cool touch of the hardwood embracing my feet as I stepped to the balcony windows. The view was breathtaking, almost as beautiful as his soft blue eyes. The mountains shimmered in the morning sun, fog draping the distant skyline. I walked back over to the kitchen and opened the almost empty fridge. I smiled. I just couldn't help but think of him as I prepared for the busy day ahead of me. My parents met me at my door no more than an hour after I had opened my eyes. I embraced them, excited to unfold another chapter in my life. We toured the town. The sights and sounds which were familiar to me, but foreign in their eyes. I stepped out of the car in the blazing summer sun, its unrelenting heat bearing down on my white t-shirt. Just this one last task before I can see him, I thought. It was hours before me, and my father finally brought the bed back to my apartment. I gave my father a hearty high five. It was finally complete. Everything was in place, from my desk to my newly placed bed in the corner where the air mattress was this morning. I hugged my parents one last time as they walked through the door to bid their goodbyes. Phew. I swiped the beads of sweat on my forehead as I walked back to my room. I stood in front of my fan, soaking in its icy cold breeze. My phone rang in the corner. It was him. My heart skipped a beat as I stared down at the luminescent screen. He was close, only 30 minutes away. Excitement filled every vein of my body at the thought of seeing him, but in that state. I stripped away my sweat-stained clothes and jumped in the shower. The knock on the door rang throughout the empty apartment as I dried my hair in the bathroom. Shit. Fuck. I dropped the towel, pulled on my clothes, and walked over to the door. I could hear my heart thumping in my ears as I reached out to the door handle. I looked through the peephole. It was him. I pulled the door open. He was just as beautiful as from the last time I had seen him. His tousled soft brown hair blew gently in the summer breeze. An oversized t-shirt draped his lean frame. The veins in his arms softly pushing from under his skin would make even the fittest bodybuilders jealous. He only caught a second glimpse of my still wet complexion before I ran into his arms for a hug. His smell was intoxicating when I kissed his neck. A sense of total euphoria flooded over me when I finally looked into his sky-blue eyes. He gazed happily at me when I finally let him go and pulled him into my apartment. I ran around the still empty living room, showing him my new home. He set his things down on the ground and walked over to the window with the views that I had just taken in this morning. The sun's rays bounced off his eyes as he stared off into the distance. I came behind him and gave him a full-bodied hug. I nuzzled my head against his neck, my face fitting perfectly into the groove of his shoulder where his collarbone jutted out. I missed you so much, I said. I missed you even more. He turned around from his gaze and looked into my eyes before landing a perfectly placed kiss on my lips. My heart almost exploded with joy. I closed my eyes, brilliant flashes of color erupting in my mind as he pulled me closer to him. His chest, his stomach, his legs brushed up against my own body as I felt myself being drawn into him. At that moment, all I wanted was him. There was nothing more I could want as he pulled back from the kiss and brushed a stray hair out of my face. I led him over to my room, pride beaming from my smile as I showed him around. He pointed at the bed. I laughed, explaining my and my father's struggle to haul its bulky frame up the slender staircase outside. He jumped on it and lay down. He opened his arms, signaling for me to come to him. I flew into his arms and he instinctively closed them around me as we embraced. He kissed my forehead, my cheeks, and then my lips. At least it's not the air mattress, he mused before pulling his shirt off and throwing it aside. I laughed. It still would have been comfy, I quipped. With you in it, I know it would have been, he said. Now, kiss me. Come on. Get up, the sun has been out for hours now. I jabbed at him as he was lying down beside me on my bed. I watched as little dust particles danced in the afternoon sun coming in from my window. The light bounced off his messy brown bed hair, his face flush with blissful peace as he snored gently into my pillow. I couldn't stay mad at him. Instead of giving him another playful push, I laid back down and draped his arms over me. He instantly pulled me in closer, flutters of butterflies swirling around my chest and stomach as he did so. I heard the soft rustle of the branches outside, and the sweet sounds of the birds chirping away as I drifted back to sleep in his arms. I woke up to him now awake playing with my hair. Finally. He joked. Finally? I was the one trying to get you up, you sleepyhead. I remarked back to him. He gave a light push, and I shoved playfully back at him. He laughed, the sound seemingly bending my cheeks upwards into a smile as I looked back up into his eyes. Come on. We got to get some food, I'm starving. I pleaded. Okay, fine, let's get going then, princess. I punched him in the shoulder, and he wrestled me back onto the bed. I tried to maneuver him off of me, but when he wrapped his hands around mine and pushed them back behind my head, my arms and legs went silent. He looked down at me, and at that moment, it felt as if I had melded into the bedsheets. We stayed there for a second, the world revolving around us as we stared into each other's eyes. I felt a strong primal urge claw its way to my consciousness. I lunged up from under his grip and landed a kiss on his lips. He let my hands go and cupped my face. We embraced each other, our bodies intertwined in the afternoon light. I kissed his neck with the fires of what felt like a million burning suns. I had never loved someone in this way before. I love you, I said. The words slipped out my lips as I looked down at him. I love you, too. This was the first time we had heard those three little words muttered. The current of emotions that ripped through my body was almost unbearable. I loved this brown-haired boy more than anything in the world. Everything in my life almost faded away in significance when I compared it to him. The sun had finally set by the time we stepped out of the apartment. He placed his arm over my shoulder as we walked down the stairs to his car. We were meeting up with his friend later to hang out. I was very much looking forward to meeting her. I could almost see the enthusiasm in his voice as he was describing her to me. He was excited for me to meet one of his friends, another look into the beautiful life of the boy I loved. As we got into the car, he slipped his hands into mine from the driver's seat and looked into my eyes. The beating, unrelenting heat of the summer sun. The blissful symphony of crickets in the evening air. Everything in my life faded away into irrelevance as I sat there in the front seat, whipped up by the swirling whirlpools of love. She was going to meet us at the library that was under construction just a little ways away from my apartment. We stopped by the volleyball court. The sun had set by then, but the air still carried with it the heat of the day. As we played around in the sand, I wanted nothing but to capture this moment on film. It was so simple, just me and this boy. I stood there, staring up at the night sky. The twinkling stars and glittering silver moon gestured their approval as I ran in to give him a bear hug. I nuzzled my head into his chest, his hands wrapping around mine and fingers running through my hair. He laughed gleefully, pushing me back and knocking me down into the sand. As he lay on top of me and covered my back and his arms, time slowed. His piercing blue eyes looked into mine. He lowered his head to kiss me, and I swear, it felt as though the sand would swallow me. I could not imagine anything else in the world that could make me happier. Simply being in his presence made me whole. Before we got too carried away, we remembered the reason why we were here in the first place. His friend walked over to us, enthusiastically calling out his name and waving over to me. "Hi," she exclaimed. "It's so nice finally getting to meet you. He's been raving about you." "Has he now?" I replied. I smirked and looked over to him. I could see even in the darkness of the night how his cheeks were starting to flush cherry. "Hey, stop it," he yelled back. "Let's get going, shall we?" We traveled up to the library, bright yellow fencing blocking off the entrances. "Maybe we should try the ladder down over there," he suggested. Before we could even get a word of protest in, he started climbing down. He's a brave one, I thought. Without a second thought, I started down after him, and not too long after me, his friend did as well. Once we were inside, we shone our flashlights on the crumpled wallpaper and torn-up floors. How this place was once so beautiful, not just a shell of its former self. Memories of my time in this building flashed before my eyes as we passed once familiar but now empty halls. After a while, we finally found ourselves on the roof. A nice chilly wind blew tufts of his brown hair as we stared over our college campus. I couldn't do anything but admire his tall and lean frame. I felt an invisible string tug me towards him. "Hey! Look over here, you guys," his friend yelled from a distance. Before we could walk over, he grabbed me by the waist and kissed me under the midnight moon. "I love you," he said as he let go of his kiss from my lips. We spent the rest of the night stuck in deep conversation on the top of that roof. When it was time to go home, we bid his friend goodbye. "It was so nice meeting you," I exclaimed. "Hope to see you soon." When we got back, we both splayed on my bed. We were exhausted, but at the very least, we had each other. We embraced, legs intertwined while we faced each other. "Love you," I whispered in his ear. "Love you more," he whispered back, a smirk creeping up on his face. I smiled. I couldn't help it. As we fell asleep in each other's arms, his three little words bounced around in my head as I slowly slipped away into the night's warm embrace. A couple of weeks after our library adventure, he was once again in my apartment. His presence had become a comforting and familiar force in my life. Every time he stood waiting at my front door, I could feel the warmth of his hug, the smell of cologne, and the scruffiness of the stubble on his face. I loved this boy, but happily ever after was never guaranteed. Small disagreements began to grow into full-blown arguments. Simple conversational discourse turned into yelling. But at the end of each one of our fits, we would work out our differences for the sake of once again being in each other's arms. But as time marched forward, the arguments intensified. Emotional turmoil and manipulation was rampant, but my naivety would always triumph at the end of the day. I had never been so in love, nonetheless, with the most handsome boy that I had met thus far. So each time his words tore into my heart, his honeyed apologies would suture the tears back together. Just like a cool wind before a summer thunderstorm, I could once again sense another brewing yelling fit between the two of us as accusations were brought up before us again. What happened, I thought. It was only a few weeks ago that this boy was lying on top of me on the sands of a volleyball court, now ripping into the heart he had once claimed to love. I stormed out of the room, tired of the same remarks. As I walked out to the front steps of my apartment, I could feel the tears rushing into my eyes. I sobbed into my arms. I couldn't take it anymore. I called my friend, the tears flowing down both sides of my face. She tried to comfort me, but the shuddering tears and uncontrollable torrent of emotions made everything she said sound like a muffle. "What do I do?" I weakly asked her. "Don't give up just yet, this always happens in love. You have to work through it, and the two of you will be stronger on the other side," she coaxed. I walked back into my room, he was still sitting on my bed. I climbed into his arms and cried more into his chest. He ran his fingers through my hair, willing me to stop my tears, but I could not find the switch in mind to make them stop. "It's okay," he said. "It's not going to be the end of the world, we just have to figure out what we both want, and that might take some time. But, I still love you." Silence crept from the darkness into my soul. Had I lost him? Was this the last time I would ever see him? A couple more weeks passed before I would see him again, and this time there was this feeling of dread I could feel deep within my bones. A heavy, ironclad sense of regret and wondering of what was going to happen next. We reminisced on the past for a moment, lying in bed enjoying each other's company. But the old proverb of time heals all wounds was not complicit in our case as another bout of yelling began. Each searing remark scorched a mark so significant in my heart that I could feel its strings ripping as I began to cry. "Just leave then," I screamed. "I can't stand it anymore." He began angrily packing his bags, throwing in the clothes that were scattered all across the floor. Regret immediately clawed its way back up my throat, but it was too late. I hugged him from the back, begging him to stay, apologizing for my outburst. But like that, it was done. Not a kiss. Not a hug. Not even a goodbye. As I watched him walk out the front door wearing the gray shorts that I had given him a few nights before, it felt as though the heavens themselves had crashed down from the skies above and put their full weight on my shoulders. I fell to my knees. I guess that was it. As fast as it had started, it had ended so bitterly. Anger. Frustration. Longing. regret, guilt. What had gone so wrong? What could I have done better? Was it all my fault? I was so angry, but the sadness that washed over my heart was unbearable. A visceral pain so deep, it felt as though nothing could bring me up from the pit of Tartarus that I had been cast asunder. Goodbye, my brown-haired boy. My first real love, like that, slipped through my fingers. Days blurred together as I lay in bed. The sun's once warming rays burned bright into my tear-ridden eyes as I turned to pull the covers over my head. Every so often, I would grab my phone, hoping to see a new message from him, but there was nothing but radio silence. Eventually, I stopped looking altogether and began to get lost in my thoughts. Flashes of our time together would replay on my eyelids when I closed my eyes. His ruffled brown hair. His piercing blue eyes. The first night we met, the beautiful sound of his gleeful laugh. I had lost it all, and it felt like my world, as I had known it, had disappeared alongside. There was not enough room for my happiness if it meant that I could not be with him. My phone would fall off the shelf, and my friends would call me, worried that I had not left or gone anywhere in so long. What's the point of it all, I thought. How can some people wander throughout their long lives and experience such pain and move on to the next person without a care in the world? Maybe it just wasn't for me. Maybe I wasn't meant to be happy with someone, rather, I would have to march through the monotonous drums of life alone before the comforting embrace of darkness would take me back into its arms. Whatever the case, days turned into weeks before I found the strength within me to return to the world outside of my cocoon. Even then, it felt like I was still a shell of the former self that I was so happy to be when I was around him. Why did my face beam with such happiness then, but now grimaced at the thought of his eyes? I had never really truly known what nothingness felt like until the kiss of summer did nothing to comfort me and the warm breeze seemingly blew through my hollow soul. Am I okay? I would ask my friends. Of course you are, they would respond. That empty and meaningless response. I'll be okay, I guess. But does the pain ever recede from someone when they have in their possession so many of your firsts? He was my first boy. The first boy I had given everything to. The first person I truly fell in love with, a deep burning passion and desire for another twin soul that for so long I did not believe was possible for me to experience. My first boyfriend. Tears and regret could not buy him back, and no matter how much I tried to reconcile myself over what seemed like such a tremendous loss, the empty void would return and hopelessness would find its place back in my consciousness. I longed for his embrace. I could hear his laugh and see his smile. I imagined the summer night on the volleyball court with him. How nothing in the world mattered when his gleeful laughs rang throughout the sandy courts. How I hugged him tightly, kissing his neck and cheeks as he stared longingly into my eyes. All in an instant, those little moments had vanished from my grasp. And to put it simply, it hurt more than anything. One likes to imagine that heartbreak does not physically hurt, that the descriptions from previous lovers are just over-exaggerated personal manuscripts to describe a more profound primal pain. But when days turned into weeks of treading through the deep abyss of nothingness, the pain of not having him there was all too real. There was this tightness in my chest. It was as if God himself placed his overbearing hands on my rib cage and was crushing unrelentingly to force me to gasp for air. As soon as a memory of him would flash in front of me, a cold and sharp stabbing pain would run down my face and end at my heart. Nothing could have prepared me for that pain. No drug nor anesthetic could possibly remove the deep-rooted emotional turmoil that clawed its way through my body. But just like any other injury, time does heal all wounds. The void would begin to fill with muted colors once again, although now with darker shades of jade replacing the rose-colored tints from before. His face became less and less clear to me as more lovers cycled in and out of my life. He was now just a part of a mosaic of men that I had created as an escape from the pitiful reality that was my romantic affairs. Was I just that emotionally incompetent, or was I simply too naive? Whatever the case, the tears in my heart were clumsily sutured through one-night stands, although some deep residual pains never really subsided. The pain of wanting to be held and loved, but never finding the right person that could hold me in such the same way as he did that night on the volleyball court. The pain of looking over in bed the next morning to be excited to see the face of my lover, but not compared to those ocean blue eyes that once sent an electrifying thrill down my spine every time. You were a lesson, brown-haired boy. And although you left me broken and a ghost of who I was when I was with you, I'm thankful for you and your impact on my life. This final part is an appreciation of you, as the pain you inflicted upon my naive and fragile soul only strengthened my resolve and solidified my identity. And for that, I thank you. I'll always love you for being the keeper of my firsts, but for what it's worth, my love for you has become stale. I have to move on to new ventures, and your chilling eyes can no longer hold me from finding someone who can make me feel loved and accepted for who I am. Goodbye, my first love. Thank you for everything, and I hope for nothing but the best for you. Bye and see you again in the next videos and stories.